Hello and welcome to Code Tutorials. In this video, we're going to explore how to display information in tabular form on your site. To do that, we'll be using the data table block from Key Blocks for Gutenberg Premium. With this block, you can share any kind of information with your visitors. The fields are plain text input, so they accept both characters and numbers, and you can even add images. No matter what you choose to share, the information will be displayed neatly and clearly thanks to the table format. Moreover, as you can see from this example, you can enable pagination for your table, so you'll never run out of space no matter the number of rows your table will have. Beyond the content and customization adjustments you can make, this block contains a bunch of stylization options, so you can set background colors or images for your table. Distinguish rows by numbering them, or columns by setting different background colors for them. And that's just scratching the surface. There are so many things you can do with this block and its options. We'll take a look now at what some of those are. Let's head over to the back end. You'll need a page where you want to add the data table block. I created this one. And we have several ways to add a new block to the page. We can click here on this blue button. This opens the block selection. Here you'll see all the blocks you have on your site. You can recognize the key blocks at a glance thanks to their reddish-pink icons. But besides the key blocks, free or premium, depending on what you installed, this selection will also show any other blocks you may have installed on your site. And of course, Gutenberg's native blocks will be here as well. So you can look for the block you want by browsing through this list. And when you've found it, simply drag and drop the block to where you want it on the page. And that's one way to add a block. Another way is to click on this plus sign button within the page. It opens a pop-up window where we'll see the search bar and a few of our most recently used blocks underneath that. You can search for the block you want by name, but as I already have the data table here, I'll simply click on it. And there, it automatically gets added to the page. And this is what the data table block looks like by default. We have 4 columns and 1 row is shown, with pagination in the bottom right corner leading to 1 more row on the second page. I know it's only 1 row because of the rows per page setting. That's this, where it says 1. I'm going to replace this with 3, so my table will show 3 rows per page. And the table display got automatically updated. Though you'll notice it only shows 2 rows. The third row doesn't exist yet. I have to make it. By default, the block only has 2 rows worth of content, so it's all we can see at the moment. But if we move to the options floating above our data table block, we'll see this plus icon. When we click on it, it opens a drop-down menu where we can choose if we want to add a heading or a text or an image item. The items are actually cells, but more on that later. For now, I want to add a heading. There. This has created a 5th column and shifted the existing cells in the table. These are our headings, and basically they function as column titles. I plan to have a table with 5 columns, so this is it. Of course, I'll be adjusting the column titles and all the content, but first let's get the shape of the table nailed down. So I'm done with the headings. The next thing to do is sort out the rows by adding new table cells. That's done using this same plus icon. And then picking to either add a text item, so if we want a cell with text content, or to add an image item, a cell that would accept graphical content. But even if you change your mind after adding one or the other cell item, you can change its nature. And the same goes for these existing cells. I'll show you the option for it later. For now, I want to fill up my table. So I'll add a new text item. And there it is in the table. And then another text item. Then an image item, and this is going to go on for a bit, so I'll skip ahead with the video. Okay, here we are. I added all the items or table cells I wanted to, and my finished table has 8 rows displayed across 3 pages. And with that done, I'm going to open the first page of the table and then go back to the options on the right. And the next thing we have is the Enable Row Counter. It's disabled by default, but if we switch this option to yes, then each row will be numbered. We'll have this extra column here, and we can adjust the width of that new column using the Counter Cell Width option. By dragging this slider or typing in a new value, you can set how wide the column with the row numbers will be. For my part, I'll clear this and set the row counter to no, as I don't plan on using it in my data table. That's mostly it for this first Options tab, Content. However, we do have one more thing here. That would be the Advanced section. It contains the additional CSS classes option. This is where you can create a specific class for this element, and then you can use that class and refer to it when creating CSS that would style your data table block. Okay, that's it for the content options. And you might be thinking, but how? We didn't change the content. Well, we'll do that directly on the page. I'll show you in a second. But first, I want to hop over to the Style tab quickly so I can show you one more option, and that is the table layout. The default setting is Auto, and we can see what it looks like on the right. The alternative to that is Fixed, which has predefined and fixed column widths. Generally, the fixed layout would create an even division of space in the table. That's great for keeping things neat if you have content that's more or less the same width. However, mine won't be, so I plan to adjust column width separately. But I still wanted to show you this option as part of that whole hashing out the overall table look first. Okay, I'll set this back to Auto and we can carry on. Going back to the Content tab, we covered all the options, and now we can actually customize the table content. To do that, simply select the content of a cell, and in the case of text, treat it like any input field. I'll delete this. My first column content will be profile pictures, which doesn't really require a title. So, on to the second one. Select the content, delete the old one, and type in your own. There we go. And with the headings for my first two columns taken care of, I can go to adjust the width of those columns. So let me select the first heading. Then if we look at the options on the right, we'll see a new option, column width. It lets us set the width for each column. The value is in percentages, and for the first one, this, I'll set 12.7. Perfect. Then for the second column, let me select it. I'll put 17.55%. By setting the column width after changing the headings or titles, you can avoid unsightly text breaks or strange spacing issues. I'll do the same for the other columns. Replace the heading first, just a sec. Okay, and then set the column width to 27.05. There. Moving on to the next column and its title, I'll use the same width here as well, 27.05%. And the last column, it's going to show a list of countries, and its width is going to be 15.65%. Yes, all my column widths are carefully calculated to fit. You don't have to do this, remember, you can just ignore this option and rely on the auto setting in the table layout. Or pick the fixed layout, whatever you prefer. Just keep in mind that if you change the column width as I've done, that setting will trump whatever you put in the table layout option. Alright, let's get back to changing our table content. Starting with the first cell in the first row. Click to select it, and using the floating options above, click here to delete the placeholder image. Once that's done, we'll get these options for image upload. I'll use the media library as I have the visuals I want there. This is going to be the first one. Select. And there it is. Now, I plan to have images in the entire first column, but the cell right under this is for text content. I mentioned earlier you can change the cell's purpose if you decide to for any reason. To do that, select the cell you want to change, and then go to the options on the right where you'll find that the Content tab now has an item type option. And using the menu, we can pick what kind of content we want for that cell. I'll switch this to image, and there, the first column is going to be all visuals. The next steps are the same. Choose the method for image upload. It's going to be the media library again for me, that one, and select. And in this way, you can go through the table replacing the text and images. But as that is going to take me some time, I'll skip ahead with the video. Okay, here we are. I finished customizing all my table cells. This is the last page of the table. And if we look through the others, it's all there. The entire table content has been updated, and now we can consider ways of styling the table we made and its content. That's where the Style tab options come into play. And these options, as we can see, are divided into several sub-tabs, each focused on a different aspect of the data table. The first tab, General, has the table layout option we talked about earlier. So going further along, we have the table alignment option. By default, it's set to the left, so nothing changes when I click here. But we can replace this setting with center or right. I'll restore the original setting. Then we have the minimal width option. It's for setting the width of the entire table. When I start to increase, nothing much happens until I reach 1300 pixels and over. This is the width of my grid and the space that my data table is set to fit. Going over that value, add a slider to the element because it's wider now than the grid allowance. This is a really useful feature if you set a large number of columns and want to keep their content easily visible. However, given that the information in my table is neat and easily readable already, I'll reset this. There. Next, we have the background type option. It's set to classic by default, so we can pick between setting a color or using an image as the table background. The alternative to this is the gradient background type. With this setting, we can create a two-tone color background with a gradient transition. Let me show you. We need to set the first color. I'll use this, for example. Then we need to pick the second color. Okay. And with the colors picked out, we need to adjust their locations, or the amount of background coverage they will have. I'll leave them the same so I can illustrate something. Finally, we need to set the angle at which the colors will meet. You see how the angle can be changed, but it's also clear to see that the colors don't really have a gradient transition. There's a clear distinction between the two. This is because of the location settings. To get the gradient transition, your first location needs to have a smaller value than your second location. You can get that by increasing the setting for the second location, or decreasing the setting for the first one. Of course, you can also keep the colors distinct if you like. Just remember to reverse the order of magnitude for the location settings. And there is one more thing we can set for the gradient background, and that is its type. It can be linear, as we can see on the left, where the colors meet along a straight line. Or it can be radial, where the colors meet at a point that's radiating out. And with the radial gradient type, we can pick the position for that point. The default setting is center-center, but we can pick one of the other available settings. For example, center-right, which looks like this. Or we can use maybe top-right, which looks like this. Also, don't forget that you can still go back to the location options and adjust them or modify their settings until you get the exact look you want. As you've seen, the gradient background has several settings that allow you to fine-tune the result. Okay, let me switch back to Classic, as that's the one I want to use. Classic, as I mentioned earlier, allows us to set an image as the table background. We can upload an image, pick one from the media library, or insert it from URL, and the image we pick will cover the entire table. So keep in mind the image dimensions as well as its content. You don't want it to distract from the table content. Alternatively, with the classic type, we can set a background color. The option comes with this easy-to-use color picker, so setting whatever color you like is pretty straightforward. Now I'm going to set plain white here, and I'll use the hex code input field to do that. Okay, there is no visible difference compared to earlier, but there is a reason I did this. The table is transparent by default, it has no background, so it's going to show whatever color you have for your page background. If you want to avoid that, simply set a background color for it, as I did with white. Okay, moving on. Our next option is heading row background color. It allows us to set a separate color as the background for the column titles. I'll set something just to show you. For example, this. We can see how the headings stand out now. I don't plan to use this, so I'll reset the option. Similarly to that, we have the first column background color option. This will change the color of the first column in the table, and it doesn't matter if your first column is filled with actual content or if you're using the numbered rows. In either case, the first column in your table will get a new background color. Alright, I'll reset this too. After that, we have the border style option. By default, it's set to all, so the table has a light gray border dividing all its cells. This border frames the table as well as the individual cells. But if we switch the setting here to inside only, then the border will be only between the cells rather than all around the table. So the table as a whole won't be framed. I'll switch this back to all as that's the setting I want to use. Next, we have the option to change the border type. It's solid by default, but we can replace it with any of the settings in this dropdown. For example, if we set none, the table will lose its borders. Or if we set double, I need to increase the border width for the difference to be visible. And for the border width, I can enter specific values for each side, or I can click here to connect the fields into one. Then I can set just one value that will be reflected throughout. And with an increase of 5 pixels, we can easily see the two lines that make up the double border type. Let's see what the other settings might look like. There's grooved, so we get this look. Solid, the one that was the same as the default. Dashed, which looks like this. And dotted, which looks like this. So those are the different border types you can use. For my design, I'll set solid and reduce the border width to 1 pixel to get a delicate, unobtrusive border. Following that, we have the border color. It has the same color picker we've already seen, and you can set any color you like. I'll set a slightly darker shade of gray than the default setting. There. Next, there is the option to set the heading cell padding. Only the fields for the top and bottom padding are editable. So if I set 50 pixels as the top padding, we'll see the space above the titles increase. And to keep things even, you can set the same value for the bottom padding or the space under the text. However, 50 is too much for my design, so I'll put 29 pixels in both fields. Alright, there we go. And then we have a similar option for the padding in the table cells. All 4 fields are active here, so we can input distinct values in each, or connect the fields into one. If you connect them, then you can input a single value that would apply to all sides of the content. For example, I'll put 50 pixels here. And this has added 50 pixels of padding all around the content of our cells. You should note how this ends up looking will also be influenced by the table or content alignment you set. So keep that in mind. Now that we've seen how the option works, I'll reset it and disconnect the field so I can enter different values for different sides. And those values are gonna be 36 pixels at the top, 30 on the right, 36 at the bottom, and 30 on the left. Okay, that's it for the padding. And also for the style options in the General sub-tab. So let's move on to the next one. And that's the main title sub-tab. The options here will help us style the column titles, or headings if you will. So we can change things like the main title tag. The default setting is H4, but you can pick any of the other H tags, or even a P tag instead. I'll stick with H4 for my table. Then we have the main title color. With it, we can change the color of the column titles, like this. I'll be keeping this set to the default color as well, so reset the change. And under that, we have the main title typography. When we click on this option, we can see it actually contains several different typography settings, starting with the font family, where you can choose from hundreds of available fonts. Then you can change the font size. I'll set 17 pixels for mine. Following that, we have the font weight, where we can pick any of the settings here and make our column titles bold or light, or in my case, medium. Next, there is the transform option. If you want to make your column titles uppercase, lowercase, capitalized, or the way you type them in, normal. Then with the style option, we can turn the titles italic or oblique. There's also the decoration option, if you want to add a line under, over, or through the titles. And finally, we have the line height and letter spacing options, in case you want to make any adjustments to the spaces there. So those were all the options you get under typography. Okay, that's also the end of our main title style options. The next sub-tab is Cell. This is where we can make changes to the look of the table cell content. The first option lets us change the cell text color. As you can see, this affects all the text in the table other than the headings. I'll reset this to keep the default color, so it matches the titles. Under this, we have another set of typography settings, this time for the cell text. The options here are the same as the ones we've seen before, so we won't waste time by going over them again. I'll simply set what I need and we'll move on. So font size 17 pixels and font weight medium 500, and now my table text matches the titles. Okay, that's it for the typography. The next option we have is the text line color. Basically, any text item that you added a link to can have a different color than non-linked text. To show you this, I'll need to create a link first. That's done by selecting a bit of text, and then in the floating options on the left-hand side, find the link icon and the input field next to it. In this field, you need to add your target URL. As I'm just doing this as part of a show and tell, I'll set a hash symbol as a placeholder. This will make my text behave as if it's been linked. And now if I go to the text link color option and set a new color, there. The text that's linked shows the new color. And this would apply to all linked text you have in your table. Also, for linked text, we have the typography settings, so we can make further distinctions to the linked text if we want to. The options here are the standard typography bundle, so they should all be familiar by now. And the final thing we have for the link is the text link underline option. It lets us pick if the link text will have an underline and in which circumstances. The default setting is initial underline, so we have the underline displayed outright. We can switch this to hover underline, and the underline will show only when we hover over a piece of linked text. Or we can set this to none, and then there will be no underline at all. Okay, I don't want to keep this linked, so I'll delete the hash symbol and that will remove the link. With that, we covered all the options in the Cell sub-tab. Let's move on to the next one, pagination. These options will help us style the table pagination, provided you have it. And the first option here is the pagination alignment. By default, it's set to the right. So we have the pagination here in the corner. But we can move it to the left, so it moves to the opposite corner. Or we can put it in the center. I'm going to set mine back to the right. Following that, we have the pagination typography. Again, it's this familiar bundle of typography settings, only these allow us to style the pagination numbers. For my design, I'll set the font size to 16 pixels and adjust the weight to medium 500. And that's it. Let me close this. Now, underneath, we have two sections, each with slightly different options. The normal one is dedicated to styling the pagination display when it's viewed normally. And those are the options open by default. So here we have the color option. By setting something new here, we'll change the color of the pagination numbers as well as the icon. I'm going to set a light gray shade here. Perfect. Now I'll switch over briefly to the hover section. The options here are for styling the pagination when it's being hovered over or actively indicating which page of the table we're on. So if I set a new color here, something darker, we can easily see the difference in the color of the number indicating which page of the table we're on. And that color will show when we hover over any other part of the pagination. For this, I'm going to set an almost black shade to create a visual distinction. Okay, there. And let's go back over to the normal section. We have the background color left here. If I set something here, there's a color, but it doesn't look all that great right away. To sort it out, let's scroll down a bit. We'll need the pagination item width option to start with. By increasing the value here, we can make the space that holds the pagination items wider. The background color makes it easy to track the change. You can use the slider or type in a value. I'll do the latter just to show you and set 50 pixels for the width. And we can do the same thing for the height. I'll set another 50 pixels here, so we get square holder space. It's bounds denoted clearly by the background color. For example, if I set 20 pixels for the top radius, we'll get this look. Now you can choose how much you want to smooth down each corner, or you can click here to connect the fields into one. Then a singular value will be applied to all four corners. And you can keep increasing that value until the holder pagination space turns into a circle. Okay, those are the options that you can use to make the pagination background color look nicer. Let me reset all this and we'll go back to where we left off. That was the normal background color. I'll reset it. And we have the same thing in the hover section. If we set the background color here, it will be visible on the active page or a section of the pagination that we're hovering over. And you'd use the same height, width, and radius options from below to adjust the look. Okay, I'll reset this too. Let's see what other options we have here. The next two fields are for uploading different icons to use in the pagination. The first field is for picking a new pagination arrow previous, or the arrow that will be on the left. I'll set something new for my table. I have the icon I want in my media library. Please note, whatever icon you decide to add needs to be in SVG format. This is the one I'll be using. Select. OK. And now if I move to the next page, there, the arrow to return to the previous page will appear, and it shows the icon I just set. I'll do the same thing for pagination arrow next, or the right arrow. It's this one. Select. And here we go. I have matching arrows now, and these arrows will automatically match the colors I have for the pagination, both normal and on hover. But we do have an additional option for adjusting the look of the pagination arrows, and that is the pagination arrow size. You can change it by dragging this slider or by typing in a new value. I'm going to set 23 pixels for mine. There. Then, these next few options are familiar. We've covered them when going over how to set the background color for the pagination. So let's see what else we have here. Scrolling down, we get to the space between pagination items option. By changing the setting here, we can adjust how much space we'll have between the individual items in the pagination. I don't want them to be too spread out, so I'll set 15 pixels here. OK. And under that, we have the pagination margin top option. With it, we can set how far from the table the pagination will be by adjusting this space here. It's up to you to decide what's the most appropriate amount of space. For my part, I'll set 16 pixels. With this, we reach the end of the options for the pagination, and indeed the style options in general. If we go back to the top, we'll see there's only one tab left, Advanced. The options here are something you get with every one of the key blocks for Gutenberg, and they serve to set how an individual block will look and act on the page. For example, there are responsiveness and motion effect settings here. While these options are undoubtedly useful as they can help you adjust the block positioning, background, border, and more, they affect blocks as a whole. They aren't specific to the data table blocks, so we won't be covering them in this tutorial. That means we're done. We managed to cover all the relevant options for this block, and as we did so, I finished making my table. We can see the content is there, the pagination works smoothly, and the overall style is neat and minimalist. Exactly what I wanted. Since I'm done, I'll hit update to save my work. And to finish up, I'd like us to take one last look at the page we started from. It shows several different examples of this block's use. By re-examining those examples, you might be inspired when it comes to styling your own data table, or you might find a design solution that you like enough to copy. In either case, now that you've seen what options you have and their effects, it should be easy to break down and imitate any of these examples. You can also create wholly new combinations of colors, typography settings, backgrounds, and more. All of those different aspects of setting up the table will help you draw attention to its content, the information you want to share. This block is very adaptable, so it can easily be used to display different kinds of data and a variety of visual and textual information. However you decide to proceed with the data table block, we hope you found this tutorial to be helpful. And if you have any questions after watching this video, or comments or suggestions you'd like to make, please drop us a line in the comment section below. Also, make sure to subscribe to our channel and be the first to learn about any new tutorials and theme guides. Thank you for watching.